on the line now, Congressman Robert Aderholt from Haleyville. He's coming on. Going to talk a little shutdown. Congressman Aderholt, thanks for coming on to Jeff Poor Show.
Hey, it was good to be back.
Yeah, good to be back. The second guest, the second time you appeared on this very, very young show. So, shutdown. It looks like I'm looking here on CNN that the talks Trump was in today kind of fell apart, and it's going to go down to whether or not the wall gets funding.
Yeah, it sounds like the meeting at the White House did not go exactly as maybe some had planned, and it sounds like the president got very frustrated with the Democrats, and which I was, quite honestly, I was expecting that to be the case. I was not, based on what we saw from the president's speech last night and from the response from the speaker and the minority leader on the Senate side. It sounded like they were still way apart, and I didn't see how it was possible that anything could be put together in such a short time.
Right. So what did you think of the president's address last night? Now, a lot of people don't think it moved the needle much, but I thought he did what he had to do.
Well, I think there's two ways to look at it. Is if it moved the needle, did it move the needle as far as the average American out there understanding that this is an issue? And I think I could make an argument that I think that anytime you do a primetime address to the nation, I think people take notice of it, and I think some people that may not have been clued in, maybe this was something that sort of, hey, we need to start really thinking about what the president's talking about. He doesn't do this often. Matter of fact, I think this may be the first time that Trump has done a primetime address to the nation. If it's not his first, it's one of the few times he has done it. And so presidents don't do this very often. And so it rises to a level that I think the American people do take notice out there. As far as the second aspect of it is moving the needle, as far as making an agreement toward ending the shutdown, you're exactly right. I think that it has basically, we've not seen anything happen over the last 24 hours, and so I don't anticipate we'll see anything happen over the next 24 hours. So it's going to be very interesting to how this plays out. The bottom line is that, in my understanding, is that the Democrats really need to do a counteroffer. They need to say, okay, Mr. President, if we do not want to fund at $5 billion the wall that the current amount that you're requesting, so we're going to offer X amount and make it a lower amount. Right now, as you know, the Speaker Pelosi has said that she would give $1, and of course is really a non-starter.
Right.
So therefore, it's really, I think it's incumbent upon the Democrats to at least put something on the table, and even if it's $2 billion. I mean, it's right now we're talking about 1.3, 1.6, according to who you ask, is what the number is, and at least if they could counteroffer with something. But to completely just say $1, I don't think that's really a legitimate counteroffer.
Are you still looking at? You thinking it's going to be weeks, if not months, or do you think we're maybe closer?
I think it's really going to be pivotal after this weekend. My understanding, there are a lot of federal employees that are slated to get paychecks.
Right.
That will not. And as you know, there's about 800,000 federal employees that won't get a paycheck. And so I think they'll be calling their members of Congress and saying, we need to come to some agreement on this. I understand that, if you have a house payment, you have bills to pay. So, I think they're going to be calling the members of Congress and saying, you need to work a deal out with the president. He seems to be very committed to this. And this is not an outrageous thing that the president's asking for. This is not and it's really, I think $25 billion was the number that he had originally requested, and this is only $5 billion of that. And I think it should be that everyone should bear in mind, and I think this is really a crucial fact, that back in 2006, 2007 time period, we passed the Secure Fence Act here in the Congress. President Obama supported it. Hillary Clinton supported, and Chuck Schumer supported it. And of course, that was well before the days of Donald Trump. So therefore, it's interesting that they supported it then, but yet they don't support it now. And that was $52 billion dollars was in that bill for 700 miles of fencing. Here we're only talking about $5 billion.
So, how do you feel about your colleagues? Are they kind of are Republicans kind of united on this? Is there any worry that you may lose some people here if the shutdown is prolonged and the heat gets turned up a little too much?
I think the last we had about 7 Republican members that that did not support the president and wanted to go ahead and open up the government despite not having the wall. But 90 to 95% of Republicans are, I think, in agreement that it's really we have to do something about the border, the southern border, and we have been kicking the can down the road for years about not really getting this serious about the wall. And so I think this President Trump, has been very straightforward and said it's time that we act.
Well, if we're looking at I guess a possibility of having to play some kind of brinksmanship here. Do you think that he gets turned up on the Democrats when people start calling their congressmen or congresswoman?
Well, I am hearing that some Democrats are getting pressure from their constituents and saying, you need to take security more seriously than you are. And then in addition to that, also when a lot of Democrats that, especially in this region in Washington, D.C., this area is represented by Democrats because there's a lot of federal workers up here that just tend to vote Democrat.
Right.
And I think they'll be calling their members of Congress and saying you need to work a deal out with the president.
All right. Well, is the sentiment there to say give him his wall so we can get back to work? I think maybe that's where it happens. This is what happened, if I recall, the last shutdown with the DACA deal. That it was ultimately the Democrats came back and said, "Hey, yeah, we're not going to be so strict about our demands."
Yeah, well, I think that they're going to be. I think what we're going to see is there's going to be the Democrats, and especially some of these freshman members that are just, there's about 60 new members of Congress that have come in just in the last week,
right,
that were sworn into office, and so I think they're getting. I was just seeing an article just in the just a few minutes ago where some of them are already saying that they're hearing from their constituents saying a deal needs to be made.
Well, I talk a little bit about this real quick, and we'll wrap it up on this. Some of your new members of the House here, and I think the sort of the celebrity now is Ocasio-Cortez, and the general sense that the Democratic Party is kind of changing and getting, maybe it wasn't what it once was when Pelosi was last time she was Speaker. How much different is it this time around? Is it more of a left-wing party than it was back in 2006?
Oh, I don't think there's any question about it. I mean, the indication that we're getting is that a lot of these members that were elected in this last round were people who were very supportive of Bernie Sanders, people who really, it's hard for me to understand, but they really embrace a socialist, more type of democracy than they do, based on what we have seen for the last almost 250 years in this country. So it's scary in a lot of ways that you have so many members of Congress that are now not only, privately, maybe they're publicly endorsing this agenda. And I think that's what, privately there might have been some Democrats in the past that would have embraced this type of agenda, but wouldn't have dared say anything publicly about it because they understand their constituents were not supportive. But now you're seeing publicly these new members of Congress that are really saying a socialist idea is maybe something we should go toward in this country.
Well, it's always been a kind of a strange coalition in the Democratic Party, and it continues to get stranger. And, now that they're in charge, they have the gavel. How I wonder what that's going to look like. Let's assume that they're kind of functioning on their own body, proposing legislation and doing things like that. Just how far left are they going to take it? And I'm not convinced that Speaker Pelosi's quite there with the especially the younger people in her party.
Well, the good thing about it, at the end of the day, that a lot of this stuff that's going to be proposed by Ocasio-Cortez, and of course, it's a mouthful to say her name. So up here, she's known as AOC.
Right.
Her initials. But the thing about it is, a lot of this stuff will not really go anywhere. The Senate is not. Mitch McConnell is still the leader in the Senate. He is not going to bring that legislation to the Senate floor. Number one, and number two, of course, the president is not going to embrace that legislation either. So there will be some things that you'll probably see that will be passed. It'll be like, I can't believe the House of Representatives passed this, but bear in mind that that will stop at that juncture. It will not go on to the Senate. It will not go on to the president, and because they're going to be so drastic and they're going to be so out of sync with what I think most Americans really believe in.
Is a lot of that just, I guess it's a product that we're heading into a presidential election, so you've got to do these things just to keep the Democratic base engaged and have them fired up to the point where you need them in November of 2020.
Yeah, and you also remember you do have some parts of the country, where Ocasio-Cortez is it's probably a very liberal part of New York, and so she is probably a lot of her constituents do support that, just like a lot of other members that were elected. There's different regions of the country that do have that, but what I'm talking about is an overall part of the overall country
Right.
do not support those type of radical ideas.
Well, that's I suspect you're right, and I think it's going to play out nationally, but that remains to be seen. They're going to do what they got to do to keep their base engaged and win a presidential nomination, which that might be go further to the left. But Congressman, I want to thank you for coming on to Jeff Poor Show, the third edition of the Jeff Poor Show.
Well, it's good to be back on, and I look forward to being with you in the future. And thanks for letting me take a few minutes and talk about what's going on up here.
All right, there you have it. This is the Jeff Poor Show on News Talk.
It can